Good afternoon, Sales Academy. Fans, YouTubers, followers, tweeters, podcast listeners, YouTube watchers, everything. Thanks for being here. Thanks for following. Thanks for sharing. And also giving some topics up for us to discuss in these musings, which we do in discussions regularly, and messages and stuff come through to go, how about this subject? So thank you for those. Keep them coming. If you've got a topic that you want to discuss, or you want us to kind of run around, kind of eyes over, thoughts over, brains over, hearts over, give us a shout. Today's subject is one that's come up a few times in the last, I'm going to say days, because it was like the back end of last week. And it's just, we've talked about this before, when things come up and then they all hover around at the same time. And this is, you can't reason with the unreasonable. And it really landed on a call this morning, an important call this morning, a real heartfelt, open, caring and supportive call this morning. You cannot reason with the unreasonable, was a statement that was made. And I wanted to unpick it a little bit, because it's really easy when you hear a phrase like that. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase before, and it means different things to different people. It resonates in different ways, but you cannot reason with the unreasonable. It's very easy to fall into the, well, I'm the one that's being reasonable. Everybody else, or the other people, or the other things are being unreasonable. And it doesn't really work like that, because life's a mirror, right? So this isn't a case of positive, negative, right, wrong, good, bad. This is understanding a little bit about psychology and emotions and logic and stuff, right? So you cannot reason with the unreasonable. If you believe that somebody is acting unreasonable, you're also recognizing that unreasonability in them. So you must hold it in you as well. That's about perception is projection, right? So what are you and how are you behaving unreasonably in that context, in that situation, in that moment, which is also potentially petrol on flames? Because if you're both sitting there thinking you're being reasonable and the other person is being unreasonable, where's the direction of travel for you both? Where's that going to go, right? So understanding and accepting that at some level, you must be being unreasonable, because you're probably disagreeing. You're probably not in sync, and that's okay. To be different, to think different, to feel different is okay. But to shift into that, and you are effectively shifting into judgment when you go into that, well, I'm being reasonable, but they're not, right? Or somebody else is being unreasonable. But also going into it a little bit deeper and unpacking it a little bit more is that, let's just look at this from a emotion logic point of view. And I'm sure you guys have read the book, The Chimp Paradox. And if you haven't, go and read the book and understand a little bit more about the monkeys and the circus that are going on, right? But if, for example, you are dealing or trying to deal with something based in logic and rational thinking, the emotional brain isn't ready to hear it. So if somebody's in a heightened emotional state and you're trying to bring them back to rational argument, logic, sensibility, it's not going to work, because they're in an emotional state. So they're not ready for rational. And the same is the vice versa. So if you're the one in the emotional state, they're rational, or if they're emotional and you're rational, it's like Android and Apple. They're not talking the same language, the same binary code. So you can't reason with the unreasonable, because, and I think this is one of the challenges with it. I think people feel, and come and challenge me on this, I think people feel that reasonable is only an emotion. Reasonable is a logical state and a kind of steady emotion and a goodness, and unreasonable is emotions out of control and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes unreasonable is complete logic out of control. How many times do I see in business where standards are not set, expectations aren't being met, but when you start scraping it around, standards aren't being set, discipline, structures and routines and good habits and stuff, they're not being set. I see it lots of times with businesses where they're firefighting stuff. So it becomes culturally a firefighting situation. Customer service, their sales, their team management, everything becomes reactionary. And what tends to happen is people get exhausted in that constant stressed state. So what they naturally do is find ways to cut corners and shortcut the system. And then what they do is they end up lowering the standards that weren't even there. Does that make sense? I hope it does. They lower the standards that weren't necessarily set, but you've got into them naturally because you were in a firefighting situation. So I'll give you an example of, let's just say a new hotel that opens, or a new restaurant that opens, or a new, a new restaurant that opens. That'd be a classic, right? New restaurant that opens. There's all the excitement and buzz of new venue and all that sort of stuff. And but what's the chances of everything being absolutely perfect before you open? And it's completely unrealistic. So it's not going to be. So you may have teething problems, which is a part of the process, right? It's normal. But then if you're operating in that stress state because of the teething problems, and then once you open, you start to get busy, but you do nothing about going back to solve some of those teething problems, proactively putting things in place, what you do is you just create a culture around that firefighting scenario, which leaves emotions very high and the logic and the reason and the rationale pretty much low. So the emotional agility is constantly pinging, and therefore exhaustion, burnout, individuals, the stress levels, I can't cope with this, because people are looking for security and stability, fundamental basic human need. We're looking for stability and security. We all have it, even I do. And I'm not a big fan of staying the same, right? So, but I still have a craving for stability and security because it's a fundamental basic human need. Look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's in there right at the bottom of the pyramid. It's a foundational block. So when you're in that state for a period of time, it's easy for somebody like me to come in, an outside person, outside body that's not emotionally tied up in it, that's not battling on logic or emotion with teams and situations and individuals, but looking at things. And I'm not trying to reason with the unreasonable, which is what we're doing in those situations, because we're either using the emotional card or the logic card, and they're not fitting because the other people aren't potentially in the logical state or the emotional state was not matching, like we talked about earlier. But from a helicopter in point of view, we can look at it logically and go, okay, cool. Well, let's just step back a second. We may not necessarily be aligned. We may not necessarily be all on the same page, and that's okay. We're different human beings. That's fine. But can we find some common ground to agree on? For example, are we doing what we're trying to do in the best interest of the customer? Yes or no? You invariably should be getting a yes, right? Are we doing this in the best interest of the business? Invariably, we should be looking for a yes. And are we doing this in the best interest of you, your individual team members? Yes. So if we can agree on those three basic principles, we've got a footing to move forward on. We're not talking emotion or logic. We're talking just simple questions that relate to every individual, to bring them back to a common ground. So we've got something to build from, something to build on, right? Because like you said, you can't always reason with the unreasonable. So stop being unreasonable. Stop believing that everybody else is being unreasonable. And start stepping back, taking a deep breath, feet on the ground, and come at it from a different angle. Come at it from outcome-based, solution-focused thinking. What are we trying to achieve? And who are we trying to achieve that for? Right, but then how can we meet there? Let's find that common ground and work back. So if you kind of look at it as like the harmony in business, right? The perfect harmony. If you look at it like a needle, the harmony in business is when you're meeting the business needs and the individual's needs in the middle, you got that harmony. But if the individual's needs kind of walk that way, the individual needs increase too much and it overshadows the business needs, you might have a happier team, but less happier customers because they're not delivering. If you shift it all to the business need, you might forget and lose some of your team along the way. So that needle you're always looking for as a leader in a business, whether you be employed in a business and it's your role as a leader, or you are the owner of the business and you're trying to drive this culture forward, what are the business needs and what are the individual needs? And how do we bring them together so we manage those expectations better? We can start to develop a culture based in outcomes and performance, not emotion or logic. There you go. That's my thoughts for today, guys. That's the musings. You cannot reason with the unreasonable. Let me know your thoughts. Speak to you soon.